Welcome, everybody, back to an episode of the 706 podcast, where the four of us decide which 706 movies are most definitively the best of all time. Now, we are thoroughly invested in this quest, and we are approximately 80 episodes in. So if you're just joining now, the gist is I'm the host for this episode. My name's Kirk. I'm going to go around and introduce my three co-hosts for the evening. So why don't you say hi, Anthony?
Anthony.
Okay. And then Tony, say hi to the fans, new and old.
Hey, guys. Not about the new fans, but the old fans. Welcome back.
And Connor.
Hello, everybody. I'm Connor.
There you go. Connor's smooth, dulcet tones, as they say. So, yes. We four are going to discuss a movie, a film today. Every week we discuss something new to be considered for our canon, and the person who hosts gets to pick the next movie we will discuss, but that's for a later point in the episode. Right now we are going to be talking about a 1994 documentary created by one Steve James called Hoop Dreams. This documentary originally started kind of the impetus for the film was to be originally a 30-minute PBS short on, inner city youth and basketball, I believe, but they captured some 300 hours of footage, and it obviously morphed over time into this chronicling of two young boys who turn out to be young men from Chicago, the inner city of Chicago, Black young men who both are, rather prodigious talents at their age in basketball players. So we follow their trajectories as they look to, aspire to something that could maybe transcend their environmental, realities, I guess you would say. So why don't we go around and get some initial impressions? Anthony was so gracious to have chosen this film that I nominated. So I think we shall start with Anthony and then head from there. Anthony, why don't you tell us, is this I know you've seen it before. Is this your second, third, fourth? What viewing was this, and how did it hit you this time? Did anything change? Did you feel it differently about some things, or did it feel mostly the same? So go ahead.
So this is my second time going through it for this show. The first time I'd seen it was way back in high school, my freshman year, and I actually watched it for a religion class. I don't remember the context or the lesson behind showing it to us, to be honest. Although I remember at the time watching it over like 4 classes, like it just felt like really long. These are like 45-minute, 50-minute periods. Of course, in reality, it was 2 hours and 50 minutes altogether. But that length of time really exaggerated that sense of time I was with these two kids. And what I remember at that time is remembering the sort of general journey, the kind of want to aspire towards something better. In this case, to be the next Isaiah Thomas. And for those who aren't sports fans, Isaiah Thomas, recognizably as one of the great point guards of NBA history. And at that time was very recently still in the NBA and very recently an NBA champion, kind of a sort of rising by the bootstraps hero and kind of NBA folklore. So I think there's a resonance there that gets lost unless you kind of are aware of that sort of history. But all that to say is at the time, I was recognizing that sort of journey, that sort of aspirational journey is kind of universal. I can admire what I saw in these kids as sort of something common, sort of something universal, the want to be something better, the want to connect to that thing you really like and be able to do it professionally and to help your family or those you love along the way. And I kind of lost, or I think I lost a lot of the detail of the kind of life that they were living and the sort of hardship for it in the kind of extreme close-up or fascination for the end goal itself, which of course they don't end up getting. But, this time watching it, I think there's a few things that strike me, which is one, it's a very good documentary. I think it's a very solid one. I think it's a great one even. I think the way the documentary as a film sets up these two kids is more interesting than most narrative films. I think it gives them a kind of straight line goal. It gives them something to root for. It gives us the family. It builds things out like a film so well. But, there's something more interesting, I think, here, which is the sort of ethical questions it raises up. which is something I wouldn't have asked back then, but I would ask now, which is one is, sure, we all would love to make it to the NBA or whatever the equivalent of the NBA is for each of us. We'd all love to get there. What this film, I think, implicitly sort of asks is there something wrong in encouraging people to even chase this dream to some degree in the first place when the odds are so astronomically, against you? And they're actually, I think I would assume, getting worse and worse as the NBA market kind of becomes enclosed to sort of kids of professional athletes, to kind of people who could afford trainings and all sorts of things. Is the journey itself even worthwhile to take when the end goal just seems so unlikely, just for the chance to kind of raise glory for your high school or for yourselves for such a limited time? I think the kind of basic things that go on in the movie, the fact that they commute 90 minutes away is absolutely now in my mind is just truly dreadful. The fact that the school doesn't amount to anything towards the academic side, it doesn't prepare them for a life outside of the kind of couple hours they're on the court or the couple hours they're practicing throughout the week. It abuses, it uses kids. And I imagine it was much more worse in the 90s. And there may not be things the film showed us just because the kind of lack of talking point the way it is now in the kind of general discussion culture. So all that's kind of in my mind. And I think one thing that maybe the movie does that's so fascinating is raise those questions. The final point I want to make about this movie is something that I don't usually have with documentaries or things based on reality. It's something a bit more common to maybe like a book or some other type of series, in which I want to look up the information long afterward. What happened to these people? What happened to these kids? Which begs a kind of interesting question of, you still want them to succeed because by the end of the movie, you're just rooting for them. But the tragedies that you see that happen to them long after the movie, the fact that they don't even really get close to the NBA. Yeah, one of them ends up working out with Michael Jordan in early 2000, but it just seems like such a loose kind of step from that dream that it's just really kind of heartbreaking. And so I think, ultimately, I'll just say this is a great movie. And I think it really makes me care for these two people, not just as athletes and not just as people pursuing something, but people I just, feel like they're friends, or I just could feel connected to each step of the way. And yeah, I'll just stop there for now.
Great, Anthony. Yeah, you really hit on some salient points for sure. I mean, I would even add that the inclusion or the globalization of the NBA right now, one of the biggest stars in the NBA, two of the biggest stars are Luka Doncic and Giannis Antetokounmpo, and both, one's from Greece, one's from Slovenia. So you wouldn't have seen those players necessarily. I mean, there were some foreign players, but the odds of becoming a professional basketball player, you are more likely to probably be a NASA astronaut, I would say.
And let's just add, since I don't know how much Tony or Connor know about these two athletes, but I don't know Luka's story other than he was a professional as a teenager and came over to the NBA as an MVP of a certain European league. But Giannis and his brothers were poverty-stricken refugees in Greece. And so there's a kind of a clear rags to riches story, from them that just seems even more inspirational to a sort of Arthur or William Gates. I would imagine, that's out there today. So.
Yeah. And you raise a lot of interesting kind of topics, but let's go to Connor now. So I believe this is your first time. This was your first viewing, Connor, if that's true. And then maybe give us some initial thoughts, how they compare to what you might have expected the documentary to be. Anything you really want to touch on, please feel free to do so.
Well, Kirk, thank you. I mean, just want to congratulate you. You have made me love sports ball. Now, of course, we make these jokes about like being a dork and like not like really following sports and having a certain relationship with sports, but I'll get a little bit biographical here. My older brother was quite a serious like athlete himself. He was a football player who made it ultimately to Division I, and ultimately wanted to be a professional football player. Obviously, we didn't come from the same kind of background. I from a very like privileged background, so it wasn't necessarily, it was an ambition, not something that was necessarily like a way out of a very miserable existence for a lot of people, like that it wasn't for many of my brother's teammates at University of Illinois, in fact. So I've kind of had a front row seat to some of this. For instance, like the recruiting process that, the recruiters that people send out, to recruit kids at a, stunningly young age, and the kind of silver tongued and kind of sleazy nature of these recruiters, and the money, that kind of is behind all this. And also when you get to the D1 level, it's a very like dehumanizing and kind of obviously kind of horrifying thing as we think about, student athletes and all this. So this is stuff that the film doesn't even show, this movie. So I've always had this relationship of kind of being like, kind of on one hand, like jealous of my brother for being like a star athlete, but also kind of seeing how it really affected his life. I mean, eventually he quit, because it was too horrible, right? It was obviously it had some, great triumphs, and there's camaraderie and teamwork and this kind of thing, but it's just such a bleak, kind of proposition, to be in this business, because it is a business, and just how, slim your chances are of really hitting it big. And so basically what I'm saying is I'm skeptical, right, of this kind of narrative. And, for instance, I've like one of my least favorite movies ever. Maybe I'll suggest it for the 7 to 6 as like as a hate episode, but it's like The Blind Side, which is the Michael Orr story. So like I hate that kind of story. I hate the narrative, the kind of the sentiment that like, oh, we took this kid, he was poor, and then he hit it, but he could play ball, and look, with the help of some white people, he made it, all the way, and it's this self-justifying kind of myth that totally just ignores like the subjectivity of the people involved. And it kind of is an insult to sport. There's like this idea of like a way of cultivating yourself and your body, and kind of like showing this kind of virtue. I mean, to me it's a very perverse thing. So obviously I was very pleasantly surprised this movie takes, I think, like a very like noble kind of perspective on this whole thing, which is a sort of detached but just slightly judgmental eye on the institutions that these kids are being funneled through, but while never losing sight of really like loving these kids. I think there's a real respect for these kids, and a sense of like the sacredness of that time of their life and growing up. And there's a kind of respect and a certain distance that the documentary strikes, that I think is like incredible. I think is like amazing. But I would just come back to like what Anthony was saying, that like think about how it ends, right? It ends with them kind of both, they're at college, and I think this is a wonderfully happy ending, that they're like, you know what, I forget which one of them says this. Is it William or is it Mann who says like, if I wasn't playing basketball, I could still be happy. I think that there's a sentiment that comes from both of them in a way, that they're kind of like, they're not making their dream, but in some ways it's a relief to not like kind of be deluded by this dream, and I think they're like better people for having maybe had the dream and kind of being kind of disillusioned from it. So like I said, I think, to me it's remarkable. And I respect, perhaps when they started, filming this, perhaps the idea was maybe these kids will really hit it big and they're going to make it to the NBA, right? Maybe that was the concept, behind it, but then they don't, but I think I love that this is still the story we want to tell, that you can go through this and it's full of disappointment, but ultimately, it's about human beings, right? Sorry, it's kind of a cliche way to end it, but no, I really like it, Kirk, and I hope there's a lot more to discuss. So I'll pass it off to Tony now.
Yeah, for sure. And I just wanted to add that before I forget, the line at the end where he says, "Oh, everybody tells me I'm going to make it, don't forget about me when I make it to the NBA." And then he's like, I kind of want to say, well, if I don't forget about me. And I think that's kind of really sums up the idea of the kind of the stakes that were set early on in these kids' lives. But Tony, go ahead. What are your thoughts? Do they mirror Connor's? Do you have any particular insights? How did you feel about maybe the technical aspects of the film? Was it a proficient, well shot film? Did you notice anything over the 4 years or so, 4+ years that these two kids were followed in terms of the quality? I know this was restored at one point in time as well, so it does look better. But yeah, let's hear it, Tony.
In terms of the technical ability, Steve James, more like leave fame, because you don't got it, buddy. You can't. No, I don't know. I love this movie. I thought this movie was amazing. I think it's one of the best documentaries I've ever seen. It's such an achievement, I mean, and just in terms of being an amazing document of a particular time and place of a particular world. and just also in terms of like a movie. It's a movie that like has things to say about America and the American city, and you know, it may have, there's a lot of social commentary without necessarily making that the point of like going about it intentionally. The movie, by depicting what it depicts, kind of makes a critique of the American city, American capitalism, the art, the sports system, this machine that's been constructed bit by bit over the years that kind of chews up and spits out all these young people that these two boys kind of stand in for. You know, how many thousands of other boys have gone through this exact experience, or even less successful, or more successful, but just as miserable, right? But it's also a movie that I think is about just living your life and just being a person, because everyone has dreams, everyone has goals, everyone has things they want to accomplish. And I think that everyone in their life faces disappointment and faces setbacks. And the way this movie navigates all that, I thought was astonishing. In terms of what Steve James brings to the table, I thought that the choices he made in terms of things to include and not include were very interesting. And for example, the scene where Man's mother, whose name I don't remember, gets her test results for becoming a registered nurse, and she's just euphoric. She's so happy. It's such a beautiful, euphoric moment. I mean, it's one of the absolute high points of the movie, because we've seen this woman struggle for so long, and like we get to know these characters so well, you know, and we get a real sense of like who they all are. And Man's mother is just such a strong and wonderful person, and to see her have that moment of triumph, and just even though it has nothing to do with the sports, I thought was just such a great choice, because you can easily imagine another version of this movie that wouldn't have even bothered filming that scene, that wouldn't have even bothered being there for that or caring about it. And I think that the 3-hour runtime allows the movie to have those moments, and I think it captures some moments of startling humanity that maybe the subjects of the movie weren't prepared to give themselves. For instance, William's brother, was it Curtis, who was kind of Curtis is sort of like the failed former wonderkid. He was supposed to be the NBA player. He was very talented. He was very good, but he basically like blew it. The movie basically says that he was like difficult to work with. He didn't listen to any advice. He didn't put in the work, and he kind of squandered it. And he's clearly full of like regret and self-hatred over his missed opportunities. And he puts all of his hopes in his brother. And it shows how this dream, the idea of being in the NBA, which the dream of escaping poverty, the dream of, there's this universal dream, I think, of like improving your circumstances, of breaking out of where you came from, and giving back to your community, giving back to your family, right? But the dream of being in the NBA is the super specific thing that is boxed in by all these systems. And the dream of the general dream, the positive dream of improving your life and helping your family, becomes this super specific thing with all these steps you have to go through. And to see that as soon as that becomes a self-conscious goal of these two boys, how it affects how everybody treats them, and how they become a vehicle for everyone else's hopes and dreams. Like the brother, who by the end of the movie, I was a little bit disgusted with. Maybe that sounds harsh, but there's the scene where William basically faces this injury in his knee in the middle of his high school career that is a serious setback to his, it's a very common experience. And it's a great example of how these things are outside of your control. You can do everything right. You can be the most motivated person in the world. You can have a great head on your shoulders. You can make great choices. You can be surrounded by supportive people, but shit can just happen and ruin your plans. And there's nothing you can really do about it, especially in sports. Like if you injure your knee, they're not going to be like, oh, okay, well, we'll give you as much time as you need and treat you as though it never happened. You still have to perform. That's the brutal, cold reality of it. And his brother seems to resent him for this injury. He goes out to play this game, probably too early, and he's mad at him. And he's like, well, as far as I'm concerned, if you went to play, you're ready. So you don't have an excuse. And I felt like just the complete lack of empathy, and just like, and you see how his brother has become almost a symbol for him. And all the characters get such a rich portrait of their psychologies, and it doesn't feel like a documentary in a way, because we get such a full picture of their lives. Another favorite character, I mean, it's weird to call the character because he's a real person, but is Arthur's father, who goes through an incredible journey full of ups and downs in this movie. Because at the start of the movie, he appears to be like a good dad and a loving husband, and everything seems to be going well. But then he goes to prison and he succumbs to this, crack cocaine addiction. And we find out that he is, physically abusive to his wife and all these things we never would have guessed at the beginning. But then he kind of reconciles with his wife and like comes back into his son's life. And he takes such joy and such pride in his son. And I find it, regardless of the things this man has done, it's impossible for me not to like him on some level, or not to want him and his son to be close, and not to be happy seeing him smiling on the sidelines of those games, just the purity of that joy. But then by the movie, he's kind of fallen out with his wife again, and you can see him sort of starting to maybe regress in certain ways. I mean, I don't know what this guy's done in real life, but it's just amazing how dense this movie is with psychological content, how rich these characters are, and what a beautiful window we get into their lives. And yeah, I mean, I could go on for forever, but I'd say that the two things I want to point out were William's journey in particular. And I agree with Connor that there's an optimism to the ending where they can kind of accept letting go of this skull. They've kind of come to realize. I think William's arc is particularly powerful because you can see how disillusioned he comes over the course of the movie. And it's not that he doesn't like basketball anymore. It's just that like he sees how like these people around him just use him, like the coach at the Catholic school, St. Joe's, who, seems like a good coach, and he seems like a good guy, and he seems like he's trying to get the best out of his athletes. And he's almost like he's the most stereotypical basketball coach of all time, by the way, right down to the glasses. He's like straight out of Central Casting. And they seem to have a good relationship, but we see with how he reacts to the injury, in terms of like, he says, well, it's your choice. Do you want to play or not? And that's such an awful thing to say because it's so passive aggressive. It's like, well, do you really care? Do you really want it? Whereas a good coach, a good mentor would say, no, listen to the doctor, take all the time you need. And also too, seeing him be all buddy with Arthur at the end, like, oh, how you doing, buddy? It's just like, it's disgusting. It's like absolutely repellent. Like you didn't help this kid at all. You completely wrote him off. And the other coach at the public school, who isn't particularly likable either, he's incredibly negative and mean throughout the entire movie. He's very real about it. He said, like, if Arthur were performing for them in the way that they needed him to, they would have found a way to let him stay. And that's just the brutal reality of it, is these people are not people to this system. They're a means to an end. And if they can accomplish certain goals and make certain concrete things happen, then they will get rewarded. But it's so fickle and it's so dependent on a million factors that are outside of your control. And I think it's embodied in the scene where the final conversation between William and his coach, where they're kind of talking back and forth, and William's kind of saying like, I kind of don't feel great about how everything went down with us. I kind of feel like you didn't treat me very well. And the coach is just like, it was for your own good. There's no introspection, no self-awareness, no like, maybe you're right. Or, maybe he's just like, no, I was right. And you'll see, you'll know that I was right. And as soon as he walks out the door, he says, I wrote it down. He says, another walks out the door, another one walks in the door. That's what it's all about. And I think that sums it all up. That's all it is. Like at the end of the day, he basically blames William for not exceeding more. He's like, he had a good career, not a great career, as if it were his fault that his knee got injured. But I thought it was very powerful. And I found myself so invested in these games, especially as Arthur is progressing in this tournament, and just like seeing these sports movie moments that would leave me totally cold in another context enthrall me in this context, because I built up so much investment in these people. And just like, I think this movie is about, in part, the way we construct narratives out of the raw material of life. Because the sports movie and the sports narrative, I mean, sports, a lot of the emotional connection people have to sports is based in the stories you tell, and I've never been like a sports guy, but it's the idea of like the legendary figure, the Babe Ruth or the Michael Jordan or the LeBron, and that person you gravitate to and that person's story and what makes them compelling to you and how you can relate to them. And they become kind of a symbol. And in a sense, making someone a symbol, making someone into hero is dehumanizing, because you lose the messy complexities of their life and you turn them into whatever you need them to be to make yourself feel good. And in the movie, we get these moments of triumph, and in another movie will be the climax or the emotional payoff. But here it's just another thing that happens before they face another setback. And that's what life is. There is no final triumph. Even if you are LeBron, there is no moment of triumph. You still have to live your life. It's still hard. It still sucks most of the time. And that's just what life is. And I thought that there was something very wise and very beautiful about that. And I also think the movie is sort of almost a Rorschach test where you can kind of take away what you want from the ending. And I think there is an optimism to the arcs these two boys go through over the course of the movie, but it also is tremendously sad. You know, I leave this movie feeling so sad for all of these people. And what a crime it is that this is the world we have, where your ticket out of the ghetto, your ticket out of poverty is this thing that is in 1,000,000 to 1 shot. Like, how obscene is that that's the alternative presented to like selling drugs? You know, it's just such a, what, you know. So anyway, I don't know how coherent that all was, but I had basically no my only criticism, I guess, would be, I think there were certain moments where certain things could have been communicated a little better, where I was kind of wondering, wait a minute, what was going on with him? Or like, wait, what happened with his ACT score or whatever, something like that, you know, where they kind of set something up and then they don't really explain it later and you have to kind of piece it together. I thought there were moments that were a little sloppy, but in a movie that's 3 hours and it's this dense with detail and life, that's going to happen. So I don't hold against the movie too much. So anyway, I basically loved it. I think it was a great recommendation.
Well, listen, Tony, I'm going to say that was a good segment. It wasn't a great segment. I'm going to say it was a good segment. You know, another co-host leaves, another co-host comes in the door. That's how it goes. I got my pipe in my office and I'm smoking with the kids right next door. Did you guys see that he's smoking his pipe?
Of course.
In the film room. Oh man,
he brings in the W. You let him do anything.
There is some just unfiltered nostalgia that I don't know. It's misguided because I wasn't really conscious of a conscious age at this time. I was alive, some 90 miles north, but you know, I have a lot of associations that I guess are buried within and are kind of provoked throughout this film. These emotional memories that I have to like Chicago, I have to, you know, the music, the sports, that when I went on like a church trip thing that, you know, in retrospect is kind of questionable, where we went down to Cabrini Green, which no longer exists, as a housing project on the north side. And we like helped clean out some apartments. In retrospect, I'm not sure if we were like evicting somebody, but anyways, some interesting, you know, as somebody who lived in a very snow globe like environment where everyone was white, you know, we had token people of color, but it was a very homogenous environment. And yeah, I just think this film is just so powerful. There's not much more really to say. I think it is a shame. It is both a very sad film, but also kind of a film where you can leave saying that, yeah, this is what happens in lives that are, you know, kind of placed in a crucible, right? That are really, really under a lot of stress from different directions. You know, I don't think either of these two young boys really knew themselves or really knew what they wanted with their lives. I'm sure from an early age, you know, it's kind of as simple as, I'm good at this, I like this. And then everybody, like Tony said, everybody reinforced that. Constant reinforcement. And really that stymies like personal growth in a way, because you're not able to explore yourself. I mean, you know, even looking in the mirror, like, do you see yourself, or do you just see a reflection of what others want, or what you can't accomplish? And so, yeah, this movie's so powerful, so nuanced. It's kind of the crux of my argument that, you know, there is so much beauty and art in our everyday lives that we can't even possibly really comprehend. And so, you know, I think that's why I tend to veer towards the naturalistic and towards the mimetic, as they say, or as I say. But you know, I'm just thinking in this film, one of the most heart-wrenching moments is when Arthur's on the playground and we see his father for the first time after an absence. We learn that his father's been away from the family. His father's very thin. He's lost like 20 pounds, shirtless, walking around on the playground. And then he goes over while Arthur's playing with his friends in front of everybody. He's waving a dollar bill, or $5, probably trying to get a nickel bag or something. You know, it's heart-wrenching. That's trauma. Like that's legitimate. That's a traumatic experience. Having parents who suffer from mental health or substance use issues is definitely an adverse childhood experience. Growing up in an environment rife with environmental racism due to, we're talking about access to resources, right? In the most fundamental sense. You look at Chicago from the GI Bill, I mean, even earlier, obviously, how immigrants were treated. You have Jane Addams come in with the settlement movement, but you have the GI Bill, which discriminated against Black Americans, and then redlining, of course. It totally led to Chicago being kind of one of the exemplary cities in terms of systemic racism. And we see that today, that echoes into the future beyond us even. So I think for me, I guess maybe that's because I work with folks who have dealt with systemic marginalization and racism. And so that's kind of where I gravitated towards, like, just seeing some of these things, seeing the cold and callous nature of, the financial officer at St. Joe's. And it's like so slimy, like the whole thing is just so sad and so slimy. And in response to that, you just see so much strength from Arthur, from William, from their parents. And it's beautiful because it's like this kind of these parallel narratives of trying to transcend and yet also feeling like one's being pulled down, one's environment is deterministic, right? Like that's what we always talk about in America. And, I think I did a lot of thinking while I was watching this and thinking about, what does sports really mean for America? I think you're right, Tony. There is sports are almost like a totem where we put these emotions that are very uncomfortable at times or experiences that are uncomfortable, and we kind of totemize them or fetishize them, and we keep them there in a way. And that's the only place where we can address them. And whether it's, memories with our parents or memories of either failing or succeeding, it's all there. And I think that's why sports are so powerful. It's so much more than somebody dribbling a ball down a court. It really is. But like in a way, it's similar to church, similar to religion, right? There's a certain metaphor that speaks to a collective, and there's a collective buy-in that's required and a mutual reinforcement of its importance and significance and the ability to transcend ultimately. And so I think that's why it's so powerful still today. But nostalgia, dreams fading, if this film ended with, Arthur and William kind of crying and saying, I didn't make it, that would be really a tragedy. But they both got into college. I know that Arthur may have had some legal issues, but I think William's like a pastor in San Antonio now, which is great. Arthur's brother, Cliff, I think, died, as well as his father. I think Cliff is the saddest figure in the whole story, really. He's like a
fairly shot. Yeah.
Like Cliff is a stereotype, but is a real person, like it's just very sad. It's, you see this overweight guy with a security uniform on, and he's talking about if this, if that, now I walk down the street, I'm just some other person. It is so hard to recover from having the highlight of your life be when you're 16, 17, or 18 years old. It is so hard to emotionally recover from that perspective. And I know people, and I even felt a little bit of that myself when I finished playing football. I made all conference, and then I was just kind of a person, right? There wasn't that reinforcement, but a lot of avenues to go to. I know I was a little lengthy there, but Anthony, I'm curious what you have to say on kind of the social elements, the sociological elements, because I think this documentary more than most, you could have professionals from, I would say, 30 different professions watch this and really be able to like point like, oh, there, right? Like you could have a sociologist, you could have a psychologist, you could have gender studies, developmental, environmental, you could do anything. So Anthony, talk about kind of the social elements. You could talk about race. We could talk about, socioeconomic status, the idea of the family unit. I mean, what did you see anything on display that maybe even was altered by the filming itself? In essence, was the filming itself exploitative? That's kind of the next level question. But some of the sociological elements that we see here, maybe you want to touch on. If not, take it in another direction. But let's just try to keep it going.
I want to get on that exploitative question in a second. But before I get there, I think in terms of the sociology, one way to take this is to get back to that question of the dream itself, the NBA. And I don't remember if it was like this then, because I don't remember when the expansion teams come along. But today, there are 30 teams. In general, there are usually 15 players per team. That means there are 450 players in the NBA who are generally considered the best basketball players in the world. What that means, though, is usually then there's an all-star team, right, each year, which is usually about 25 to 27. So to be on that all-star team, to be that they were thinking about is Isaiah Thomas, who's already a kind of rags to riches figure, a top 10% player of less than a percent of a percent, probably of a percent of like these top players in the world. I was thinking about this and working backwards and thinking about the pressure that dream itself must have on these kids. And to think that it may be sort of surprising that more kids and NBA players even don't actually buckle from the pressure of everything around them, of being who they are. It is to me amazing that LeBron James, with all the stuff he's gone through of expectation, of people wanting him to fail, which is something else we don't talk about when we think about sports, like, right? Like we think about Michael Jordan, but in NBA, like there's a huge contingent of people who want LeBron to not be as great as Michael Jordan, to not even be great as, another player still active, which has its own kind of unique psychological resonances. But to go through all that and to go through what these kids went through in today's social media kind of climate, I can't imagine. I feel like it is surprising that you don't hear more about professional athletes kind of buckling under that and going into sort of potentially dangerous situations. And I know people do, and I know teenagers do, but it's one thing I think that's, remarkably something to be proud of to a certain degree, which doesn't excuse anything here. But that's one thing I wanted to talk about. The other part in terms of the exploitative question, one thing, because I love bringing up the paratextual stuff in relation to this, we talked about Curtis, who was killed as a result of a love triangle, I guess. He was murdered because of it. The dad was murdered, I think, in 2004 for Arthur. But Arthur himself has called the movie a blessing and a curse. On one hand, the movie and the kind of publicity and, I guess, profit or some degree of money allowed him and his immediate family to kind of move away from their neighborhood as seen in the movie. On the other hand, what it meant is a sort of confrontation with a legacy of what to the outside world is failure, a sort of recognizing the fact that he didn't come into being close to his dream, he didn't reach it. And I think there's a potential, like, really harsh sadness that part of the pleasure of this movie, part of the sort of reward for it for viewers like us, is that these kids don't make it, is that we know they don't make it. And yeah, the movie ends on kind of a sort of back and forth note, depending on how far you want to take it. But like, doesn't the movie lose a sort of sense of meaning, I think, if the movie ends and then we find out 5 years later these kids actually made it somewhere, they became millionaires or even 100,000aires or something? Like, there's a sort of weird reward that we get for watching these kids stick to their sort of lifestyles and stick to their sort of socioeconomical expectations, which is sort of a perversity, I think, about film and about documentary watching, especially about youth in quote unquote a ghetto, an inner city, a sort of urban environment. But yeah, I mean, so I sort of agree with that kind of label to some extent. I don't know what others think.
Yeah, let's toss it around. I mean, I think this is kind of a pivotal question, in the sense of like your role as a documentarian, as a filmmaker. I mean, he's kind of like a recruiter too, right? Like, I don't know who said it, but I'm sure he wasn't like, let me take a middle of the road kind of, who do you think is going to be a bench warmer on the team? I want to follow him for 4 years. They were looking for the best players, and, they were kind of prospecting in that way. But with this kind of filming, I mean, it's part of your identity then, like even more so than just everyday basketball players. You are part of a documentary about it's very meta in a way, and it's like, must that have affected their development in some way? I'm curious, but I think ultimately it might have been worth it. I'm sure we would say that, it was ethically informed and all that, especially for the time. What do you say, Connor, and then Tony?
I'm just thinking about what Anthony made. I think a very strong, sort of claim, right? That like, in some ways we kind of like enjoy like seeing them fail, right? That perhaps too for like class reasons, there's a kind of implicit racism there too, that we don't want them to succeed, to transcend their class in some way. I mean, I think it's a pretty intense, I'm kind of like wrestling with that, with his point there. And I would say that, like, as Kirk said, it's mitigated somewhat by the fact that, like, yeah, they didn't intend setting out to like film probably this exact story. I think they probably did want a kind of rags to riches story to some extent, right? But I think the fact that it ends with those interviews, it ends with kind of a moment of this kind of like emotional like resilience, and like actually like being willing to like move on. I don't know. I think that's like, to me, that it's not the same thing as like wanting to see them fail or feeling catharsis because we see them fail. I mean, I guess you're right, because ultimately what I failed to mention, if I say it's a very happy ending, obviously like their lives are not, where they wanted them to be. And obviously their lives are still, like by any stretch of the imagination, they, suffer under this oppression that has followed them from when they were kids and will follow them probably their entire lives. And obviously like that's not good, but I think still it's like the way they navigate that, or like their internal lives as portrayed in that moment, I feel like it is like a win. It is a triumph, and it is kind of inspiring. In the same way that sure, it could be inspiring if they just, if they really hit it big, and he could buy that house for his mom and stuff like that, which does happen as well. But again, I do fear that it's like, that's kind of the trick. Who wants to tell you that story of the rags to riches story, right? The NBA, right? Or these colleges as well. And it's insidious, I think. I'm not sure I answered your question at all, Kirk, but
no, I mean, also, and we're just kind of off the cuff here. I mean, Connor, did you have anything that came up throughout our kind of rebuttals or our responses that really spoke to you? I know you said Anthony's response there was quite interesting and provocative, but anything else?
One little thing I'd like to mention is the time. Kirk mentioned the time period. And I'd say, except for the opening theme song, which I thought was very like jarring and so early 90s, to me, it felt kind of timeless. Or when I say timeless, I mean, it feels like our time, without cell phones. But I don't know. There's something about when we see Curtis, there's kind of a montage when we finally we take a little side trip into Curtis's life, and he just watches TV, kind of stares into space, sits on like this like windowsill and just kind of stares, walks around in a warehouse, in this total state of precarity and a sense that his life is going nowhere. And he actually has a moment like, sometimes I say to myself, like, you're not going to make it. Like, you're not going, like, that despair, right? Which is the kind of counterpoint to everything that the boys are going through, right? That's the kind of life that theoretically awaits them if they don't, make it. That despair is with us, is our lives. In some ways you see that it's like that kind of despair has been with us, that exact routine, even those exact things, images were shown, that kind of despair, exactly what so many people, right, are experiencing right now, and have experienced. And I don't know. So there's a kind of a timelessness to it, but I don't want to, argue that obviously there's so many aspects that do, call back to the 90s. But then if I could, and take it or leave this like big theme, but what it made me think about too is this issue of like professionalization. I never made this connection, but like I'm interested in professionalization of, for instance, of like classics, of classical studies in my own like research, for instance. And obviously the professionalization of sports is like a very old topic, and it's kind of a myth that there were never non-professional sports, right? But it's so complicated in this movie where it's like, you didn't have the professional leagues at the top and the possibility of making money. You couldn't also have these moments of like true authentic triumph and like school pride, and like this inner city Chicago school makes it Marshall makes it all the way to almost to the state championship, and like that's so meaningful. But like, would it mean as much the spirit of sports, of competition, and hometown pride and all this. And could that even exist if we didn't have the professional leagues like motivating all of this? Which is kind of a sad thought. I mean, I like to say yes. If we just had sort of local teams, we could still enjoy sports without it being nearly so exploitative. But anyway, I'm just curious what you guys made of that theme.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think the biggest point you might be able to press home is like through the inculcation through the media of children. I think that inherently kids enjoy sports, but maybe if they have these idols, they feel like the stakes are raised a little bit and they want to emulate them, of course. I didn't really have aspirations of going to like the NFL or anything when I played, but maybe it's more implicit, it's more implied. It's like this is a stepping stone, right? There's a spectrum or a ladder. You're able to move up the rungs of the ladders. But Tony, if you have any thoughts on that, and then obviously on any other topic we've talked about, it's been kind of mismatched, but we just want to kind of make sure we don't leave anything on the table, which is hard to do because it is a long film with so many elements, of course. So we're doing our best, but whatever you have, Tony.
Yeah, well, to return briefly to Anthony's point, that in some ways the movie and we want the boys to fail, it's an interesting argument. I don't really agree, though, honestly. I feel like the better documentary, quote unquote, the more like popular documentary would be the one where they succeed. To me, that feels very intuitive. And I think Steve James wanted them to succeed. I think he bonded with these boys. And I think most people who watch this movie are going to want them to succeed. I guess, yes, we get a more poetic, nuanced view of America because they fail, but that's not, I would rather they have, whatever. I don't know. I don't quite buy that. I think Connor made an interesting point with the way, I guess, that, not to keep bringing it up, but like, capitalism essentially taints this pure thing. Sports of just like, to me, sports are just the way we channel the natural human urge to be competitive and to be tribal, right? Like you have a team, you have your team, my team's going to compete with your team. And that impulse, of course, can be very destructive and indeed leads to a lot of horror in our world. Sports is one of the more productive and wholesome ways we can channel that energy that exists, whether we want it to or not. But again, when this professionalization comes in, it introduces this element of the stakes are so much higher. And I think the stakes that we feel in those scenes give them that sense of triumph and that sense of despair. And I think it increases the kind of emotional valence of these moments. So, yeah, and I think that the movie does a good job threading that needle of really showing us the beauty of basketball and showing us that the truly euphoric highs that sports can provide. I'm not a sports person, but I understand that thrill. I understand. I have had those moments watching sports in my life, like isolated moments where you are really invested in the game and you feel that thrill and that excitement when things go your way. And just like, and there is, something beautiful and transcendent about it. And also just, it creates a place in our lives where we can have that moment of triumph, that moment of transcendence, because where else are you going to have that, regardless of your socioeconomic position, we have that, or like Connor said, like the warehouse job and the drudgery and despair of that, the idea of being resigned to this banal existence of going to this job you don't particularly like, a job you never imagined doing, and just that being your life, that being the future and the hopelessness of that and the existential horror of that. And sports provide a way to escape from that. And it doesn't have to be sports, it can be other things, but I think for a lot of people, it is sports. And I think the movie shows us that and demonstrates that while also being skeptical of it. And I don't know. I think it's interesting. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer or a very clear, I don't think it comes down explicitly condemning all of it, but I don't think you could either without compromising the nuance and the complexity of the portrait that this movie paints.
I would also say this movie, it was I was about to say 18 years ago. I wish it was 28 years ago that this movie was created. And Steve James did I would say a relatively good job in terms, you talk about timelessness, Connor. It didn't feel incredibly dated in terms of it kind of stands the test of post, 2013 or 2015, whatever, where we've really as a society become more aware. But yeah, I think there's two ways to view this film. It's one is like, damn, they didn't make it, that sucks. And then I think a lot of people would kind of watch that like, this movie sucks. Like, why didn't they follow Michael Jordan? Why didn't they follow, LaMarcus Aldridge or Paul George? Why'd they have to follow these bums? And then there's another one who can like, actually, you can take in what happens within the film. And then, I think, Anthony, you're right. There is some comfortability as a white liberal for me in seeing, it's very subliminal, I think. But like, I think I would be taken aback if like they do a fast forward and Arthur's like a CEO of Exxon. You know what I mean? Like, I'm sure you're right. And I'm trying to be as honest and like interrogate myself as I can. Like, yeah, when things turn out the way we expect, and I guess we expect certain things of people that come from certain places, this film is draped in racial construction, right? Racial projection. And so I think it's very, very fascinating what you're bringing up, Anthony. And the idea also that we can kind of turn off the TV and we're all kind of separated in a way from the reality of people who may be growing up without lights or on cash assistance in the near south side of Chicago right now. Like, there is some distance that we all have, and it's a privilege for sure. But I would love to talk about this just forever, really. I really love this film. Anyways, let's go to the voting, and then any final thoughts that any of the three of you have. I guess we can go in order. Anthony, if you'd like to go ahead.
Sure. So it's obvious yes for me, but as a final thing, and I'll just keep this quick and short, as a sort of defense of the thing, is I think want could be a little too strong of a word. I think we want them to succeed. And what I'm saying is, as Kirk was trying to get at, is there's a sort of underlying subliminal expectation of some of the failures that recur throughout the film. And I think one thing that we may consider that we didn't get into is, once again, the paratextual stuff of this movie's reputation. The fact is that this movie is on the Criterion Collection. This movie is espoused as sort of this great documentary for a group of people who aren't necessarily the ones in the film, but kind of standing outside of it, the ones who are kind of, to a certain degree, maybe espousing a sort of level of comfortability in their own home. The fact is that, we have the successful version of this movie that exists. It's called, The Real MVP, the Kevin Durant story, the other sorts of NBA documentaries about success. The fact is those don't have the sort of critical reputation or even the sort of film online reputation as this one. And I think part of it has to do with the sort of expectation of those racial constructs that underlie us and underlie what's kind of happening in the city. And I mean, the fact is also, the sequel to this, Hoop Reality, where a man does kind of actually get through, doesn't take off the way this does, which maybe has other kind of reasons why. But that's also something I just wanted to bring up. So yes, for me.
Thank you, Anthony. And let's go ahead, Connor.
I just want to say thanks to Anthony for going more into this point. And I think he's right. I think I can't deny that there's an element of this little expectation, that may affect. But I would say it's something like, I don't know, the critical establishment loves things that are sad. We don't like to be told, beautiful lies, I guess, is kind of the idea, fairly or unfairly. And I think the dynamics that you mentioned are at play there. So yes, I would like to mention one more thing before I vote. Basically, think, for example, okay, we have NWA plays for a moment, and we also have at the football camp, which is put on by like the big like college football programs, Spike Lee appears to tell everyone like they're manipulating you, like they're using you, they don't actually care about you. Like, he tells like the brutal truth. I don't know how they ever let him in to like make that speech, but like, and he just immediately is just completely like papered over, like it never happened, but it's like there's something about that too that, like, I don't know, I mean, I don't mean to make this about Spike Lee, but the kind of the way that even the critique can be co-opted by the system, right? That to even have the person pointing out the flaws in the system is the way that the system keeps itself going, et cetera, et cetera. Right? Maybe there's a point to be made there, which could be kind of used against the movie in a way. And I guess maybe could it be more explicit, more radical? Could it be more, but no, I think it's great at what it does. I think it's fantastic. And a little bit of its distance is kind of its humility and it's in going about its task. It started out like as a PBS, like documentary, right? I think it's just very much just like a very functional, but ultimately very like transcendent, like piece on this subject, which I've always, obviously I have this like personal experience with, so, or not very personal, but that I've seen a little bit in my life and that I've always wanted to find a way to like talk about and think about. So yeah, this is definitely a yes for me.
Thanks, Connor. Go ahead, Tony, round us out.
I know this is about as solid a yes as I can imagine. I thought this was an amazing documentary. It's a movie that's been on my radar for a long time. I'm glad I finally saw it with you guys, and I loved it. This is a movie that like I put in the sort of Showa act of killing kind of category of an incredibly important document. Like this is a movie that I want people to see. And I think this is a movie that has endured in the way it has because it really says something about it says something about our society, much like Joker. I think this movie is profound. And I think this movie is both kind of a searing political indictment of, the way things are set up, and also just a human story about what it means to go through life and deal with the disappointments that inevitably hands us. And it's I think one of the best probably ever seen. So I'm going to give it a yes. Not that it's a Mishima, but it'll same combo.
So Tony felt a little, he thought it was mediocre, as he said. He wanted more NWA. He wanted more Spike Lee. Honestly, it's funny. Spike Lee, is criticizing the system. He goes to every Knicks game and even most away games. So he's a little complicit, as is the NBA. Totally. I mean, having Martin Luther King alternate jerseys isn't necessarily going to do anything to affect real change within these communities. But, and ultimately it's 30 billionaires who all these people are playing for, and it is a business, and it's a little bit beguiling at times. But thank you, folks, for that's a long film to watch. It's a commitment. Thank you for watching. I'm glad. It sounds like each one of you got something out of it. Even Anthony, you've seen it before. You had a different experience than in 4 different homerooms or whatever it was. But so now let's move on to.
Kirk, can I say one?
Yes, go ahead, Connor.
Favorite interaction. The associate coach of St. Joe's or whatever is talking to William, and basically he's like, so you visited this campus or whatever. He's like, well, have you talked to the prominent black students? And he's like, the what black students? It's like, I mean, the leaders of the blacks, the people who control or are in charge of the blacks. It's like there's just this complete. There are moments, it's obviously it's always threatening to break free, the kind of the complete the reflexivity, let's call it that, the racism, right? And I love that moment. It's the most like shocking, jarring moment of that, but I just don't want to let it go without comment. Yeah,
the new one would have been like, hey, so William, have you seen Black Panther yet? It's a good movie, right? Wakanda Forever, stuff like that. But anyways, you're right. The movie's chock full of that. And, I think we're all giving a recommendation for any listeners to go out and see it, invest your time, and you will come away with something to hold on to, really. So let's move on. I'm now going to hear 3 nominations for our next film, and it will be up to me. I have the honor and the responsibility of choosing which film to consider for the 706 that we will collectively consider. So Connor gets to decide the order, and we have our little wrinkle, of course, where we're claiming decades. You cannot have 2 films in the same decade nominated. So somebody, I'm sure Anthony right now, he's thinking, oh, I'm going to nominate, my favorite movie ever, Pulp Fiction. But if Connor comes in and he nominates Reservoir Dogs, it's over, so you got to get a new decade. But go ahead, Connor, with the order, and then we'll go from there.
Kirk, I've got a nice spread of different movies from different decades, so I don't feel the need to go first to get my decade in. I will instead go last because, frankly, I still need to pick one for my list. So how about Tony goes first, and then Anthony, and then myself?
All right, I'm gonna claim the 1980s, and I got kind of an out there one, or kind of a wacky one here, and it may have been Connor who introduced it to me. I don't remember exactly. But this movie I watched last year or the year before, and this is A Penguin's Memory, A Tale of Happiness. This is a movie from Japan that started as a beer commercial and deals with themes of war, PTSD, trauma, love, trying to find human connections, and it's all about cute penguins. And this movie has some scenes that are pretty intense, pretty emotionally intense, pretty raw, and some moments of real triumph. It's a very curious artifact, but a movie that I really liked, and I think is tailor-made for the cast.
Based on a beer mascot. These penguins. And sorry, Tony, what decade is it? It's 1980s. 80s. Okay. So, well, I guess it's Anthony next.
Yeah, well, thank you, Tony. I do want to hear more, but we'll wait till the rebuttals. So go ahead, Anthony.
Yeah, very curious choice, Tony. Let's see. So he's doing the 80s. I'm going to go older. I'm going to do a Connor decade, the 1940s. Okay, so I'm going to do I think a somewhat of a bold choice. Maybe I'm wrong. But my movie has been called the Citizen Kane of movies because it's Citizen Kane by Orson Welles. And so I don't know. I assume all of us have seen it. I could be wrong. But just in case, and for the viewers who don't know, it is essentially a sort of movie about this group of people trying to figure out this mysterious word spoken by the elusive Kane and trying to figure out what meaning may lie beneath it. And the journey that we go on is a sort of journey of what it means to be a sort of man, what it means to be a lonely man, alienated from the world, despite what may seem success and money. So 1940s claim, Citizen Kane, directed by the Orson Welles.
Haven't heard of that one. Sounds a little avant-garde. Maybe you should have picked something, with a little more esteem, Anthony. We're sick of your off the cuff picks. Anyways, Connor, what you got your favorite decade is off the board. I don't know. The 40s are gone. What are you gonna do? So let's hear it.
This was tough, Kirk, and I'm going to recommend a little bit against type. And when I say type, wait until I finish my recommendation. So you will recall that Sidney Poitier passed away not too long ago. Obviously, Sidney Poitier in many incredibly classic films, monumental star. I'm going to recommend a movie that has him in it. He doesn't play that big of a role. He's kind of a bit part in it, but I think it's a way of honoring his legacy, sort of, and also a way of getting a sort of kind of like just sort of a Hollywood kind of like middle of the road kind of movie. You might call this a kind of a popcorn classic. Didn't blow the doors down of the critics, but I'm talking about 1990 something's Sneakers, which stars Robert Redford, I believe. Anyway, I forget exactly who's all in it, aside from Sidney Poitier, of course. It is about basically hackers. It's kind of a heist movie about hackers. Like I said, from the early 90s. So it's kind of representing a generation of kind of the first kind of tech and sort of IT and computer kind of people, and sort of how, as they kind of enter their adulthood, how the world starts to change kind of through their agency, through the technologization and informatization of our society. And also it's just very entertaining and very cool. That's my pick.
Okay, interesting. Well, yeah, it sounds like we have three different movies, obviously that bring their own particular discerning tastes, of the nominator. But yeah, we will let's see, we will go to some rebuttals. So we got Monk, we've got the Fifth Estate, and we've got Happy Feet. So yeah, very interesting choices. Let's hear. Or it's Mank, isn't it? It's Mank. I sound like such a doofus, but
Honestly,
it's okay.
Mine is a little bit like Monk, I would say.
Monk, the TV show.
I loved Monk back in the day. I'll say, Anthony, we don't do TV shows on here. I love Tony Shalhoub, but I just don't think he's got what it takes to go toe to toe with
all right,
Tony.
Number
6.
Not everybody, I could have gone to Tish and I'd known it was Mank, but it's okay. It's fine.
I was gonna say it's interesting, these 3 movies, because they're often compared and debated on movie forums. I can't count the number of times that people say, no, A Penguin's Memory is better than A Citizen Kane. And then like the most upvoted comment is like, y'all acting like Sneakers isn't even a thing. And it gets quote tweeted with like, yes, queen, hand clap emojis. It's
eye emoji, fire
emoji. Exactly. But I think I have a pretty compelling case that of these 3, which are kind of called the anti-noir genre, informally, that A Penguin's Memory is the true masterpiece, and that if Orson Welles had lived to see it, he would have promptly committed seppuku, in tribute to Japanese culture. So anyway, I think we need more animated movies. That's my pitch for Penguins. I think it's very bold to pitch Citizen Kane. I'm not sure how much meat is left on the bone, but we can go. I mean, it's always fun to do a classic. I think it's good to do a genuine classic from time to time. And Citizen Kane certainly merits a discussion. We could talk about Citizen Kane for 3 hours if we wanted to. I've never seen Sneakers, although I am curious. Certainly seems against type, but I think the Penguin film is such a curiosity. It's such a weird little thing. It's kind of in the vein of Connor's last pick, Wizard of Speed and Time, in that way. It's a movie that stuck with me just for its novelty, and its incredible strangeness. But once you make it past that initial layer of novelty and come to terms with what the movie is, it's kind of beautiful. And I found myself very surprisingly emotionally invested in these weird cartoon penguins. And basically the plot is a young man goes to fight in the Delta War, which is just the Vietnam War. And we get some kind of intense war scenes at the beginning of the film. And he's just struggling to rebuild his life as a civilian after coming back. And we see like issues with his family, issues in his love life. And it handles PTSD in a remarkably mature and thoughtful way. And it's a movie that I think more people should watch. I don't know. I think there's a lot of pros for it, but my main argument would be we're overdue for an animated movie. I don't even know the last one we did.
All right. Anthony, why is Citizen Kane important? Is it a good film? And yeah, let's hear it.
Well, if you guys have seen that meme of Marjorie Taylor Greene yelling at AOC, AOC is Citizen Kane. Marjorie Taylor Greene is Mr. Popper's Penguin. So Tony's movie sounds interesting. Sounds like Grave of Fireflies a little esque. This sort of 80s, was a Japanese film that kind of deals with the horrors of the past. I'm always down for something like that. I haven't seen it. But I don't remember what animated movie we've done recently. Oh, we did Spirited Away, I think was the last one. But in this world of animation, do I want to watch an animated movie that just feels something akin to a sort of Wizard of Speed and Time as our next movie? Maybe not. It's just something about it just doesn't sit as the movie for next week in my eyes. But it sounds interesting. I'd be curious about it at some point. Connor's movie I haven't seen, but I looked at the cast real quick. It does seem like a kind of awesome throwback, or at that time, early 90s, high A+ cast, River Phoenix, Ben Kingsley, Robert Redford, Sidney Poitier. It does sound, though, kind of like it's fitting Connor's usual end of history 90s decade theme. I think with Citizen Kane, this will be just maybe my final pitch since I know we're over time. There's something that I think we haven't done really, which is to go back to the sort of top of the list, the sort of A canon material, and discuss what we find about it. Sure, maybe it's overdone, maybe there's no meat on the bone, maybe we're just be kind of tired of it. But I actually think, while we're watching it, there are moments that really hit hard, despite supposedly having this movie ingrained in every other movie we watch, or kind of every other pop cultural memory that we have about it, on and on. And I just think, it might be interesting to kind of go back to something like this, to go back to a bona fide classic, whether we agree or not, as fans of the movie or non-fans of it. So that'd be my pitch.
All right. And Connor, let's hear about Sneakers.
Okay, well, I'm just going to rebut the others. I mean, obviously, Penguin's Memory, it's kind of grim, dark animation. You've seen it. No, I'm kidding. Actually, I do really like that one as well. I don't like it quite as much as Tony does. I think it's a pretty good installment in like the anti-war film like genre. Maybe there's others I'd pick like above it, but obviously it's pretty cool that it's all about penguins too. And as for Citizen Kane, it's trash. It's trash, overhyped, nonsense. I'm coming for Citizen Kane. If you pick it, Kirk, no holds barred. It sucks compared to A Touch of Evil, which I said last time. It's better than Citizen Kane. So I have to stick to what I've said on the podcast. So I will try to make the case. And as for mine, very entertaining, cool. It's thoughtful. It's witty. It's feels kind of like the end of an era, not end of history. Okay. But obviously it feels like a kind of swan song of, kind of classic Hollywood filmmaking, and kind of very wit-based sort of writing and that kind of thing. It's cool. I think I think we all would actually be surprised by how much we enjoy it, but I admit it doesn't necessarily feel as critically important or historically important as Citizen Kane, but this is what you're in the mood for.
All right. Wow. Well, we have some great choices here, as always. It's tough. I try to balance out. I try to investigate whether or not I should be selfish, whether I should go with my guttural response, or if I should be a little more pragmatic, or perhaps forward thinking, and choosing a film that I think will balance our canon well. And so, I'm going to do what I usually do, which is I'm going to pretend like this podcast serves to edify me in a certain way. And I will go ahead and choose Citizen Kane for these reasons. One, I've not seen the full film. I stopped it. I know that's like, we just lost 35,000 subscribers, but it's a film that didn't grab me initially. I'm also intrigued to hear what Connor has to say, and I'm sure Anthony will pull out some really great nuggets for us. I don't think we're under any illusions or delusions that this is going to be the ultimate podcast on the film, but I think we can bring our own spins to it for sure. And I'm interested to hear, the blowback, which I'm sure will come. So it should be spicy, and yeah, let's hear from the victor, Anthony.
Well, I didn't know if that was going to be a sort of bold throwaway pick, but I'm glad we're doing it. I'm sorry to the Penguin film. Sounds interesting. Sorry to Sneakers. I'm sure we'll get a lot of people who quit watching us forever, but I'm glad we're doing a little film that I hope more people see in the near future, Citizen Kane. So I'll have what she's having.